The following content depicts found footage, audio recordings, and assembled files. The events, locations, and individuals depicted are fictional to ensure anonymity. Viewer discretion is advised. Share your experiences and reactions in the comments. They may be used in future studies of unexplained phenomena.
The choir in the hollow. The first miles into the Appalachians felt like a slow unthreading of the familiar. The road narrowed with each bend, curling into itself, as if reluctant to let us through. Beside me in the van, Ellis tapped the recorder's case like a talisman. Mara hummed nervously, jotting notes about the dwindling cell signal, the collapsed barns we passed, the silences stretching between the trees. We weren't tourists. We were hunters of songs fragments, of ballads, old harmonies carried in brittle voices. That was the pretext, at least. The villages sat low, almastiden, houses tilted against the weight of the hills, porches sagging under rusted rocking chairs. We parked by a general store whose sign had lost half its letters. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and dust. When Ellis asked about the old songs, the clerk's eyes dropped to the counter. A pause too long, a faint shake of the head. Outside, the few locals we approached gave us the same polite, evasive smiles. A man tightening rope on his truck muttered that music here stays in the hollow, and walked away without looking back. Their distance only sharpened my curiosity. I thought of the stories I'd read, melodies older than maps, sung low so the mountain would not overhear. As the sun leaned into the ridges, we found a cabin to rent, its roof patched with tin, its windows swallowing the last light. We unpacked our gear, arranged microphones and reels, as if we could conjure voices from the dark. The mountains pressed close, shadows clinging to every corner. That night, before sleep, I stepped outside. The air was sharp, scented with wood smoke. From somewhere deep, beneath the hush of crickets, I thought I heard a faint rise of tones, like breath drawn into song. And it was not coming from any house. Morning blurred into tasks. Ellis recorded Mrs. Kramer, a stooped woman with a voice that fluttered between notes. A fragment of a lullaby, nothing unusual. We thanked her, left her porch, and she closed the door quickly, as if shutting us out of something heavier than weather. Back at the cabin, Mara transferred the tapes, her fingers smudged with graphite from frantic notes. She frowned when the reels spun. At first, I thought it was distortion wind across the microphone, but then the sound thickened. Mrs. Kramer's lone melody was twined with other voices. Dozens. Men, women, children threading harmony where there should have been only one trembling line. Ellis laughed, thinly, blaming the machine. Old heads, magnetic bleed. His smile was paper thin, but the voices were not mistakes. They followed the rise of her tone, folding under and above, like a congregation no one else could see. We played the tape again, louder. The harmony swelled until it filled the cabin. Mara pressed her palms over her ears. I stared at the reel, hypnotized, until I heard it. A cadence that did not belong, a low answer to the lullaby, a voice bending toward words. I could not make them out, but I knew they were not hers. Outside, the woods leaned closer to the window. The cicadas had gone silent, as if listening, and then the recorder clicked, though none of us had touched it, and began to spin backward. 2 days in, the mountain air began to change me. I woke to the kind of silence that made your breath sound intrusive. We set out that afternoon, climbing a slope where the trees knit overhead into a green-black ceiling. Our microphones dangled like charms, recording nothing but the crunch of boots and the occasional crow. Then faint, but unmistakably chord drifted through the undergrowth. Not a bird, not wind. Human, layered, shifting from alto to tenor to something wordless. We froze. Ellis adjusted the gain, searching the direction. The voices slid between trunks, echoing from everywhere at once. I swear they came from the soil itself, as though the ground was exhaling. Mara whispered, "Do you hear them praying?" I could only nod. The harmony thickened, as if swelling upward from under our feet. My chest trembled in answer, like my ribs were a resonant chamber. We rushed downslope, crashing through brush, but the sound never receded. It moved with us. At one clearing, it fell silent, all at once abrupt, like a hand had smothered it. Only the sound of our ragged breaths remained. Ellis cursed and killed the recorder. We looked around. No people, no footprints. The moss lay untouched, branches unbroken. The forest stood as if it had never heard a thing. Back at the cabin, I replayed the file. Static. A hollow hiss, like air rattling through a throat, and then found our own footsteps. But beneath them, something else. The same harmony, muted, pulsing low. My ears strained. My stomach nodded. The tape had remembered what the mountain wanted us to forget. And yet, as I sat listening, a name surfaced through the low tones of my name, spoken softly then layered over and over. The hairs on my arms bristled. It couldn't be possible. We hadn't spoken aloud. Not today. Not ever. The next morning, Mara suggested we follow a creek she'd marked on her map. The air was thick with mist, carrying the mineral taste of stone. We walked until the trees thinned, and there, scattered in the underbrush, were stones carved with circles. Perfect rings, some overlapping, others alone. Moss crawled across their grooves, but the cuts were sharp, recent. I crouched, pressing my palm against one. A vibration passed up my arm. Subtle, like the quiver of a distant train, but there were no trains here. The ground was humming to itself. Locals must have done this, Ellis muttered, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. Mara traced one circle in her notebook, hand trembling. "These aren't folk art," she whispered. "They're something else." Farther along, we stumbled upon a clearing shaped precisely to be natural. A ring of bare earth, trees bent outward as if repelled by the center. The soil there was blacker, damp, and warm under my boots. When I stepped closer, the hum deepened until it thrummed in my teeth. It felt like standing on a drumhead, my body becoming part of the rhythm. Ellis insisted we leave, his voice thin, sweat shining on his temples. As we turned away, I thought I heard laughter, light and hollow, woven faintly into the hum. Back at camp, the recorder revealed something worse. Our own words from the trail were answered softly, melodically, in tones we had never sung. De hecho didn't mash. Our own voices. It twisted and harmonized, a chorus of the unseen. The mountain was speaking. The villagers knew. They had always known, and when I listened closer, a single note lingered, high and trembling, almost a whisper. My own voice, calling from inside the hollow. Recording in the cabin that night, I aimed the microphone at our conversation, half in disbelief, half in a need to capture evidence. Ellis joked nervously, trying to diffuse the tension. But when we played back the tape, a second layer had formed beneath our own voices. Low harmonics, tremors of sound that answered us. It was as if the mountain itself had a voice, a pause, and then a whisper. My name. Not from Ellis, not from Mara, not from me, but the recording made it clear. Someone or something knew me. The hairs on my neck bristled, my heart slammed like a tidal wave against my ribcage. We moved outside, hoping the open air would dilute the unease. The forest loomed, dark and wet from an afternoon drizzle. Every rustle in the underbrush sounded orchestrated. Every sigh of wind a note in a hidden symphony. Mara crouched by a small creek, peering at the stones. Each pebble seemed etched with the mountain's memory. Ellis set up the recorder again, this time speaking nonsense syllables. The playback returned with a reply, a haunting echo, a chorus that mimicked and answered, mocking and learning. It didn't stop at repeating words that completed them, shaped them, twisted them into melody. I realized we weren't just recording. We were conversing with something older, something alive in the soil and stone. A tremor ran through my teeth as I spoke, and I imagined the mountain inhaling, exhaling through the stones. We were intruders, our voices merely ripples in an ocean of unseen sound. The following morning, the air was dense, almost viscous, as if carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. We tried to continue our expedition, but each step seemed choreographed by some invisible conductor. The voices had grown louder overnight, forming harmonies that didn't belong to any human throat. Ellis went to record near a ring of stones, deeper in the woods. I waited, watching him scribble notes. When the chanting swelled, it was beautiful and terrible, a living tide rolling through the trees. My stomach knotted with awe and fear. Minutes later, Ellis Banisa. 1 second he was crouched, focused on a circle. The next a ripple in the fog swallowed him. Mara screamed. I ran forward, shouting his name. The fog closed, indifferent. When he returned hours later, he stumbled into the clearing. Eyes blank, mouth slightly open, hands marked with circular burns, as if pressed into the stones by some unyielding force. He could not remember how he got there. His voice trembled when he tried to speak. Every syllable felt borrowed by the mountain. I realized with a cold certainty that the voices did not merely haunt, they drew life, threading it into the eternal melody of the hollow. We packed our equipment, recording every sound, yet it was already too late. The chorus lingered, embedding itself in our memory, our very thoughts. I whispered into my recorder, a futile act of defiance. Our voices were already becoming part of the mountain's symphony, carried away in harmonics we did not control, and somewhere beneath the roots and soil, the mountain listened. Patient, inexorable. As the choir waited for us to join, the cave opened like a black mouth in the mountainside. Our lights barely penetrated the damp air, casting fractured shadows on slick walls. A hum from below followed us, now a chorus, layering dozens of tones in unsettling harmonics. Each step we took echoed, but beneath it, I could hear whispers, familiar yet impossible, voices of those missing 4 years in this region. Ellis held the recorder forward, trembling. As we listened at the playback, transformed, our own words from days past interwove with unknown tones, creating a harmonic puzzle. The cave seemed alive, each stone resonating, sending vibrations up through the soles of our boots into our bones. Then we saw them not human, not entirely, faint shapes, silhouettes of the vanished, hovering just beyond focus. Their mouths moved in silent song. The choral we had chased through the forest was the echo of these absorbed lives. Every dialect, every lullaby, every whispered chant ever sung here by villagers or wanderers now existed simultaneously, suspended in the rock and air. A strange clarity settled over me. The mountain collected voices, not bodies. Every note carried a fragment of identity, preserved as a melody. The vanished were neither dead nor gone. They had become part of the mountain's song, my own voice, recorded in our earliest sessions, pulsed with the same resonance. I felt my presence vibrating, tugged toward the central rhythm. Mara's eyes met mine. Do you hear it? There, calling to us. I did. Every echo, every harmonic layer, spoke our names and our histories, intertwining them with the long lost. The mountain was a choir, and we had stepped onto its podium. Panic surged. The path we came from dissolved in darkness and shifting echoes. The voices grew louder, insistent. Our own cries for retreat became musical notes, captured, twisted, and fed back into the chorus. The walls seemed to breathe, compressing and releasing, guiding the harmonies like currents of a hidden ocean. Ellis stumbled, hands over his ears, but a faint smile flickered across his face. His lips moved involuntarily, forming words he hadn't intended. The song pulled him into rhythm. I could see it, the invisible threads connecting him to the harmonics, dragging him into the composition. Mara screamed, but the sound became another layer in the song. I clutched my recorder, recording every note, terrified that stopping might sever my own tether to reality. The cave amplified our fear, each heartbeat a drumbeat synchronizing with the harmonic pulse of the absorbed souls. I realized that running was futile. The notes were alive, conscious, and hungry for completion. They replicated, repeated, and demanded participation. My colleague's voice merged fully with the choral he, became both singer and echo, part of the perpetual cycle. I felt the pull next. My limbs resisted as the vibrations tugged through me, threading my own voice into the eternal song. I tried to step back, to resist, but the chorus rippled beneath me like ocean tides, dragging down a swimmer, inexorable and consuming. The final frame in my mind. The cavern filled with a sea of voices, our shouts, songs, whispers, all layered and repeating endlessly. I could hear my own tone, faint but distinct, now inseparable from the collective. I understood the mountain claimed nothing physical. It absorbed identity, folding life into melody. The last thought before the darkness overtook my conscious resistance. The mountain never forgets. It sings, and those who enter must join the choir, whether they wish to or not. The cave breathed around me, its walls slick with condensation, yet humming with a resonance that seemed alive. Every step I took echoed endlessly, multiplying, folding over itself like waves caught in a whirlpool. My hands clutched the recorder. The battery light blinked red, barely keeping pace with the surge of sound. I glanced at Mara. Her eyes were wide, pupils stretched, unseeing yet fixed on some interior vision I couldn't reach. Ellis followed silently, dragging his feet as though the ground itself resisted him. The harmony had become a tide, pressing against us from all sides, pulling. My chest heaved. The voices had grown articulate, each syllable a tug at memory, at identity, at the marrow in my bones. They were singing our own fears back to us. A sudden lurch of a rand, then silence so complete it felt like drowning. I stumbled, and the recorder slipped from my grip, capturing the faintest scuffle as it skidded over stone. From its mic, the choral returned, now unmistakably responsive. Every shout, every breath I had uttered in the past days now ranged out, layered, interwoven into a chorus that had no beginning and no end. I could hear myself calling out, my own voice warped, answering the mountain's pulse. Mara's whisper became a chant she did not consciously make. Ellis's steps echoed like timpani, each one syncing with the undulating rhythm beneath us. I realized with a sudden, chilling clarity, the mountain did not merely echo. It consumed. It folded our identities into its memory, binding us to the eternal resonance of its hollow. I tried to speak, to protest, but the words were swallowed mid-air, re-emerging as threads of melody in the choral. Panic clawed through me, yet there was a terrible beauty in it, the voices of the lost, weaving themselves around the living, drawing us into a pattern older than any village or road. My skin prickled, my own hands felt foreign, responding without consent, brushing over the rock, as if tracing unseen notation. The recorder picked up a final swell. My voice merged seamlessly into the harmonic tide. The distinction between self and chorus blurred. I saw, beyond the cave mouth, the night sky stars reflecting like shattered glass on a black river, but I could not move toward it. The pull from beneath, from the deep resonance, was inexorable. A single, sustained note filled every corner of the cave, vibrating through bone, muscle, thought. My name resounded, stretched, split, and finally absorbed. I was singing without singing. I was listening without hearing. I was gone, yet every whisper I had ever uttered remained, entwined with those who had come before. The recorder fell silent. Then, almost imperceptibly, the choral's hum continued soft, persistent, and eternal. Somewhere deep within, my identity flickered, then faded completely, leaving only the mountain song. The echoes rolled outward, carrying with them the stories of the lost, the living, and the vanished. In that vast harmonic sea, there was no boundary. There was only the hollow, and I was part of it now. The Lantern Road. We arrived at the foot of the trail just as dusk settled over the mountains. The path was barely there, swallowed by overgrown brush and fallen leaves, just as the old maps had suggested. My two friends, Simon and Leela, scanned the route with flashlights that barely pierced the mist curling low around our ankles. The forest felt alive, and the silence pressed against our ears. Every rustle of leaves sounded like whispering voices. every groan of timbered branches a secret warning. As we climbed to the slope, narrowed and the trees drew tight above us, knitting a dense green-black ceiling, I thought I caught glimpses of distant light small lanterns bobbing, almost teasing us. Each time we quickened our pace to approach them, they vanished, leaving only the trembling mist and our own hurried footsteps. It was fascination and unease all at once. The trail promised discovery, but also a subtle, gnawing dread. I set my camera on a tripod, trying to capture the lanterns before they slipped away again, but the lens picked up nothing but fog and darkened trees. Simon muttered about optical illusions. Lila nervously joked about the ghosts of old villagers, but inside I felt the trail itself watching us, daring us to follow. Night fell fully as we set up camp near a clearing on the trail. The lanterns returned, emerging from the fog like drifting stars, moving slowly uphill and downhill in a rhythm that felt intentional. With each flicker, the forest's whispers joined in low hisses, rustling leaves, as if something unseen trailed us. We attempted to film, but every time we focused on a lantern, it moved to a different position, just out of reach. Our cameras and night vision equipment recorded shapes, fog, and the occasional glint of light, but never the figure carrying it. The trail seemed subtly shifting underfoot, wider in some spots, narrower in others, as if the mountains themselves were rearranging it. Sleep came in, fits and starts. Even lying in our tents, the faint glimmer of a lantern danced through the mist, always ahead of us, always just beyond touch. I awoke repeatedly to the sound of my own name whispered on the wind, a cold brush across my neck, but no one was there. Something about the forest was learning us, reading us, playing with us. On the third night, a lantern appeared that made my stomach drop. It hovered where we had walked minutes before, following us like a shadow. Our flashlights flitted across the clearing, illuminating only the mist and dark tree trunks. No hands, no figure, just the light moving deliberately, mocking our every step. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the forest floor, sometimes suggesting humanoid shapes floating just beyond sight. Simon swore he saw movement that mirrored our gestures. Lila clutched my arm, her knuckles white, as if the lantern could sense our fear. The forest had become a mirror, and the light its reflection. We backed slowly, hearts hammering, until the lantern drew close to our campsite. Its glow intensified, almost painfully bright, casting a stark light through the fog. The cameras whirred and blinked as if aware. I whispered to Simon, "It knows we're here," and he nodded, pale-faced. Whatever controlled the lanterns, it wasn't human, and it was waiting. The last frame of my recording caught the lantern drifting toward us, steady and unyielding. And then, the screen went white as a sudden static hiss filled the audio. The forest swallowed its own secrets, leaving us poised on the edge of something we could not yet name. By dawn, the mist hung low like a curtain over the trail, softening the edges of trees and rocks. We moved cautiously, the lantern from the previous night flickering faintly in the distance. It hovered, then darted sideways, as if testing our attention. Every time we tried to close the gap, the trail seemed to stretch, branches brushing against our arms like ghostly hands. Ellis muttered about Desiavu, who every turn we took felt familiar yet wrong. Mara's eyes were fixed on the light, whispering coordinates aloud, hoping to anchor herself. The forest seemed alive, branches bending subtly in anticipation, shadows stretching longer than our own. Lanterns appeared above us, inside the mist, then behind, mirroring our steps with eerie precision. The path narrowed suddenly, leaving barely enough space to pass, then opened again into gaps of moonlit clearing. Our voices, calling to each other, were swallowed by the forest. Responses came not from our friends, but from the lights themselves. One lantern flicked left as I called a question. Another dimmed when Mara laughed nervously. It was playful, testing us, yet impossible to confront. Night deepened, and the air grew dense, moist, clinging to our skin. The lanterns multiplied, hovering at heights that seemed unnatural, some just above the ground, as if floating on invisible currents. Our senses wavered. A wrong step felt like falling into a hollow beneath the trail. I realized then, the trail was no longer ours to traverse. It belonged to the lanterns, and we were following, but only as they allowed. The first real shiver came when I glanced back. A lantern appeared directly behind, in the exact spot we had stepped minutes before. The forest exhaled around us, carrying whispers that echoed names we hadn't said aloud. We stumbled into an area where trees bore carvings, strange glyphs spiraling upward, some intertwined like notes. Stones scattered in precise circles reflected the faint glow of the lanterns, casting long shadows that seemed to crawl toward us. Each step made a sound, yet we saw no disturbance, as if the trail itself had memorized our passage. Footsteps accompanied ours, soft but deliberate, falling out of sync with any known rhythm. The wind carried faint whispers, forming syllables that felt like attempts at speech but dissolved before recognition. Mara reached for a carved tree, tracing a symbol with trembling fingers. "These aren't just marks," she whispered. "They are instructions, or warnings." The lanterns became capricious, appearing and disappearing, occupying the exact spots we had passed moments ago. I felt a pull in my chest, as though the forest and its lights were reading us, responding to our movements. Ellis kept glancing over his shoulder, pale and muttering, "They know us. They know everything we do." I started to see patterns, circles of stone and glyphs aligned with the lantern's positions. Each step through this spectral choreography amplified the sense of being observed, yet we could not turn away. Every corner we rounded presented a faint shimmer of a humanoid silhouette, just beyond recognition, tethered to the lantern's light. Panic began seeping into our nerves, a slow tide against which reason could not swim. Yet fascination held us in place, like moths dancing too close to flame. The forest thickened, shadows pooling under twisted branches. One lantern floated ahead, stationary, almost as if waiting. My friend, Ellis, stepped forward, reaching toward it. In an instant, he vanished. A scream tore from my throat, followed by Maras. Nothing answered but the wind, carrying the faint echo of his voice, and the lantern's cold, indifferent glow. I grabbed the recorder from my pack, desperate for proof, and rewound the playback. The footage trembled, the lanterns floating without body, occasionally revealing flashes of distorted shapes. Humanoid, but not quite, tethered by thin threads of light. The truth pressed against my skull. These lights were not carried, they were alive, conscious, and capable of guiding, ensnaring, or discarding at will. Mara clung to my arm, eyes wide, whispering that we must keep moving. Every path now twisted unnaturally. The forest seemed to stretch and fold, drawing us deeper. I felt the trail's pulse, an invisible rhythm that matched the lantern's flicker. Each step was a negotiation. To resist was impossible, to flee uncertain. The remaining lanterns moved ahead, beckoning silently, mocking our confusion. I realized that leaving the trail was impossible. We were bound to it, as surely as Ellis had been, caught in the forest's hypnotic cadence, trailing the light deeper into the unknown. The mist thickened, swallowing our feet, twisting the sounds of our breathing. One of the lights winked closer, then vanished into the shadows behind us. I understood then the forest would not release us until it was ready, and the trail had already chosen who it claimed. We pressed on, led by the faint glimmers floating ahead. The fog thickened, clinging to us like damp silk, and the trail seemed endless, twisting upon itself. A labyrinth. Without end. Lanterns drifted above the mossy path, then below, flickering and darting as though teasing us. Knowing our every move, I called out, trying to make sense of them. Each word I spoke seemed to provoke a response. The lanterns shifted in patterns, circling us, moving in synchrony. Shadows stretched and recoiled, forming fleeting humanoid shapes that vanished when we looked directly. Mara grasped my arm, whispering that the trail itself was alive. Observing, every step became a negotiation between trust and terror. Footfalls echoed strangely, as though answering to some unseen conductor. A lantern hovered just ahead, pulsing in rhythm with her own heartbeat. And I realized, with growing dread, that our presence was being catalogued, studied. We were participants in a game older than any memory we carried. Ellis tried to take a photograph, but the camera caught only light trails, no forms. It was becoming undeniable. The lanterns weren't merely lights, they were entities, bound to something just beyond perception. I felt an almost magnetic pull, as if we were being drawn into the mist itself, and the game had rules we would never fully understand. The trail seemed to elongate, warp, branches bent, almost pointing the way forward, or perhaps warning us to turn back. Mara, his voice trembled. She had seen a former reflection of her own shadow moving independently of her body. Fear and fascination tangled together in our chests as the lanterns danced between us in the fog, teasing, herding, mocking. The path ended in a clearing, and the lanterns paused, hanging in midair. Silent, a shiver ran through my spine. The game was over, and something else was about to begin. Chapter 8. Revelation in the mist, the clearing held a single lantern, suspended unnaturally, glowing steadily. The fog seemed thinner here, yet denser, pressing upon our senses. And then I saw Gemelis, the missing friend, standing confused at the edge, his eyes wide, hands trembling. He could remember nothing, his memory a blank canvas where terror had painted shadows. I raised the camera from the backpack and replayed the footage. The lanterns had no hands. They floated, tethered to forms glimpsed only for a heartbeat, a flash of movement that left no imprint, no footprint, no tangible shape. The truth hit with the weight of the mountains themselves. The lights were conduits, vessels, perhaps even sentient, existing in a liminal space between the physical and the spectral. Ellis reached out, almost instinctively, and the lantern wavered near his hand. The air thickened. The fog twisted around him. He froze, eyes locking with mine through the mist. I understood then. Any touch, any attempt to claim or contain these forms would pull you into a limbo, neither living nor dead, suspended in light and shadow. Mara muttered something incoherent. Then another lantern mirrored her movement, drifting toward her as though responding. Panic rose, but reasoning failed. We were ensnared in a pattern, our steps recorded, catalogued by the very trail we thought we commanded. The clearing seemed infinite, edges dissolving into nothing, and the lanterns hung around us, waiting, observing. We stumbled backward, recording everything, knowing that footage might survive where memory could not. The forest swallowed sound, leaving only the hum of suspended light and our own fear-strangled breaths. And for the first time, I truly comprehended. This was not a prank of the mind, nor natural phenomena. The lanterns were alive in ways our eyes could barely accept, and we were already too entangled to escape untouched. Chapter 9. Alone with the light, I ran, the fog thickening with every step, the trail folding over itself. Mara was beside me at first, then vanished snatched, swallowed by the spaces between the lanterns. I screamed her name, but the echoes returned twisted, harmonized with the lantern light, mocking my desperation. I clutched the camera like a talisman, its lens reflecting the last lanterns in the clearing, suspended, burning with an eerie, conscious glow. The sound of footsteps, whispers, and faint laughter merged. I realized too late that the trail itself had absorbed my friends, preserved them as echoes within the light. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time was meaningless. The camera remained, recording my flight. The last lantern drifted before me, steady, luminous, reflecting my own eyes in its glow. And I understood. The lanterns had a will, a consciousness. They collected, maintained, and reproduced anything that approached, creating an eternal loop of observation. I paused, breathless, heart hammering. Shadows in the mist moved in sync with the lantern, my reflection fragmenting into the spectral forms I had glimpsed before. Every frame on the camera was alive, resonating with the presence of the trail and its lights. The air hummed with the echo of countless souls. And so, I survived, but only in name. Alone with the light, I became both observer and observed. The camera continued recording, and I could hear it. My own voice, distorted and doubled, floating among the lanterns. My shadow, too, lingered, drifting with the lights. The trail would remember me, just as it had remembered the others. And anyone who came after would find only echoes, whispers, and lanterns that refused to die. The buried cabin. The forest was dense, almost choking, with twisted roots and fallen branches creating an obstacle course. Mist rolled down the slopes, clinging to every leaf and stone, making the Appalachian woods feel both ancient and sentient. I followed the faint line drawn on the old map, my two colleagues close behind, ears straining for any clue beyond the whispering wind. Every step brought a soft rustle. Sometimes I thought it was our own feet, but then the sound moved independently, echoing just out of reach. Hours in, we spotted it a mound, barely noticeable, its roofline peeking above the earth like a half-buried skeleton. My stomach twisted with curiosity and unease. The soil was compacted, holding the shape of a structure long forgotten but remarkably intact. I felt a pulse, subtle but undeniable, as though the cabin itself breathed beneath the layers of dirt. We circled, careful not to disturb the fragile ground. Shadows clung unnaturally to the trees, and the fog thickened, swallowing shapes in the periphery of our vision. I had a fleeting sense that the forest was whispering, carrying our names along with the mist. We took out the camera, attempting to capture the outline, but the lens seemed to distort, turning the edges of the roof into something more sinister, almost organic. As evening settled, the air cooled, and the mound appeared even more alive, as if anticipating our next move. The first chapter of exploration had begun, and a quiet dread settled over me. We were not simply approaching a cabin. We were approaching something that wanted to remain buried. Stepping closer, the details became clearer. The walls, though coated in dirt and moss, were intact. Doors half swallowed by the earth. The first floor, all but devoured. Furniture peeked from the soil like fossils. Chairs tipped slightly. Topless, tilted bed frames frozen in a half-fallen collapse. A heavy silence dominated, punctuated only by soft thumps from below the muffled voices calling from the earth. Each step we took made the soil groan faintly, like it resented our intrusion. I placed my hand on the compacted earth. A vibration traveled up my arm, subtle yet insistent, as if the cabin was trying to communicate. Trigging to warn, we spoke softly, debating whether the sounds were echoes, some trick of the acoustics, or a warning from the past. The camera recorded the ambient noises, and I replayed the footage repeatedly. Beneath the wind and the rustling of leaves, there were whispers that didn't belong to any of us. Night fell, and the forest shadows deepened. The air inside the half-buried house smelled faintly metallic, like iron and soil combined. Then I heard it, faint but distinct. My name, carried from beneath the floorboards. My heart seized, and I froze. The whisper lingering, teasing, coaxing. It was no longer just a cabin. It was a presence, and it had acknowledged me. We cleared the debris cautiously. The air inside was stale, heavy, with that faint metallic scent lingering like a warning. Half-buried objects littered the rooms. Books whose spines had cracked under pressure, dishes coated in dirt, and a rocking chair that seemed to have shifted on its own, tilting slightly forward as if inviting someone to sit. I switched on the recorder. Faint knocking echoed through the compacted floor, followed by soft pleas. Open, open. My colleagues exchanged uneasy glances. Was it a trick of acoustics, the echo of soil shifting, or something else entirely? Each sound had rhythm, intent, almost sentience. The whispers grew louder when we moved, urging, beckoning. A small fissure formed along the floor, jagged and slow, as if the earth itself was yielding to something beneath. The movement drew our attention and our dread. The cabin seemed aware of us, responding to our intrusion. I crouched, staring into the widening crack, the recorder trembling in my hand. There was no turning back. Something was beneath the floorboards, and it wanted out. Our presence had awakened it, and it had begun to reach. The air inside the cabin was dense, heavy, smelling faintly of iron and damp soil. Every step sank slightly into the uneven, dirt-covered floor, and the team felt the pressure of the earth pressing from all sides. The walls, half swallowed by soil, seemed to lean closer with every movement, amplifying the claustrophobia. Objects that should have been mundane took on eerie significance. Chairs half buried at odd angles, tables tilted unnaturally, books protruding from the soil as if trying to whisper forgotten secrets. Mara touched one of the chairs, and it tipped over slowly, making no sound, an impossibly weightless movement. Ellis felt dizzy, clutching the wall as though it could steady him. "It's like the ground is alive," he muttered, voice strained. The narrator noticed small vibrations beneath their feet, almost like faint pulses, as if the cabin itself was breathing in anticipation. Soft thuds echoed from the lower floor. Every sound seemed magnified. A scrape of soil here, a whispered shift there. They moved cautiously from room to room, hearts pounding, senses on high alert. The cabin's half-buried nature warped their perception. Doorways seemed farther apart, ceilings lower than they had just measured. The narrator paused in the main room. Soil shifted subtly beneath his boots. Then a chair toppled as if pushed by invisible hands. They all froze, eyes darting to the corners. Something watched, patient, aware. The chapter ends with Mara stepping backward, eyes wide. The floor beneath her trembled slightly, and a faint cracking sound rose like a sigh from the earth. She whispered, almost to herself, "It's moving. It knows we're here." From beneath the partially buried floorboards came faint, rhythmic thumps. At first, they sounded like settling soil, but the narrator's recorder picked up something unmistakable. Voices, whispered pleas, repeated in a cadence almost too deliberate to be human. "Help. Open. Help. Open." The team gathered near the center of the room, trying to locate the source. Shadows danced along the walls, cast by their flashlights. Every time they focused, the sound seemed to shift, staying just out of reach. "Could there be a hidden cellar?" Ellis asked, unease creeping into his tone. Mara shook her head, eyes scanning the cracked floor. "It's something else, something aware." The air grew thicker, charged, like static before a storm. Footsteps echoed beneath the surface, yet no one moved. The soil underfoot trembled, subtle but persistent, creating the sense that they were standing on a living creature rather than wood and earth. A hand-shaped outline appeared, pressing against the underside of the floorboards. It pulsed, reaching upward in slow, deliberate movements. The narrator tried to capture it on camera, but the shadows warped and elongated, refusing to reveal a clear form. Fear mounted. The voices grew louder, almost chanting, and the soil seemed to respond with tremors that tickled their feet. They shared anxious glances, realizing the cabin's history of vanished families may not have been legend. The chapter ends with the narrator whispering, "It's calling us," as the hand presses once more against the boards, lingering in the dim light. A fissure widened along the floorboards, dark and yawning. One team member, Ellis, knelt to peer inside. The earth responded instantly, gripping his clothing, pulling with a slow, inexorable force. Panic erupted, screams filling the stale air as his feet lifted slightly from the soil. The narrator lunged, hands grasping at Ellis, but the ground resisted, swallowing any attempt to control. Mara tried to grab the recorder, but it shook violently in her hands, catching snippets of distorted voices, disturbing harmonics of human cries and low rumbling. A rhythm built in the cabin. Thumps, whispers, a dragging sound that seemed to come from the very soil beneath. Ellis disappeared further, slipping from sight, leaving only the trembling floor behind. The narrator's heart raced, every instinct screaming to flee, yet curiosity anchored him in place. The camera captured shadows stretching toward the fissure, fingers sore, the illusion of them clawing at the edges. Soil vibrated alive and aware, pushing and pulling with intent. The remaining team member tried to anchor themselves to a heavy table, but even that trembled, as though resisting the earth's hunger. Suddenly, the fissure snapped shut, violently, sending a shockwave through the cabin. Dust and soil rained down. The knocking and whispers ceased abruptly, leaving only ringing silence. The camera wobbled violently, capturing the aftermath. A quiet room, littered with debris, heartbeats loud in the narrator's ears. The chapter ends with the narrator breathing heavily, staring at the sealed floor, the recorder dangling, static faintly whispering through it. A final warning, or perhaps a lure. The air felt heavier, charged, As I stepped back into the cabin alone, every footfall sank slightly into the compacted soil, the floorboards groaning in protest. Dust particles floated in shafts of dim light, catching in my vision like tiny specks. I traced my fingers along a half-buried table, noticing patterns in the dirt impressions of fingers, small tools, even vague shapes of bodies, almost as if someone had left them pressed there intentionally. Each creak seemed amplified, echoing from corners I couldn't see. The whispering had ceased, but a low vibration thrummed under my feet, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. I reached a doorway, paused, and felt a presence, not just watching, but aware of me, shaping the silence. My recorder picked up faint whispers again, distorted and layered, repeating my own name. I turned sharply. Shadows moved in peripheral glimpses, but nothing materialized. Panic pressed against my chest. I moved carefully toward the small fissure at the center, the same one that had pulled at my friend. The soil seemed to breathe, tiny shifts underfoot hinting at something alive beneath. My breathing quickened. I shined my flashlight along the crack's maw. Fleeting figures darted just beyond vision, too fast, too subtle to focus. The ground trembled slightly, and a muffled cry erupted from below. I froze. It was my friend, calling out, but the voice felt warped, alien. The cabin seemed to pulse, as though aware of my hesitation. My stomach churned. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet I couldn't. My curiosity, my need to witness, anchored me in place. I crouched near the fissure, hands brushing the coarse edges of displaced soil. It had widened overnight, the earth shifting as if impatient. Small rocks jostled, tapping rhythmically like deliberate knocks. Shadows began to coalesce above the cracks, elongated, humanoid, but incomplete, bending and stretching unnaturally. Each movement felt calculated, drawing me closer to the edge. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, echoing pleas and laughter at once. Primera lea, Nedober peering into the darkness, and glimpsed my friend's face, or what I thought was theirs. The features flickered, distorted by shifting soil and shadow. I reached out. The ground pulsed violently, and spectral hands or shapes clawed upward, grazing my sleeves. A sudden tug nearly pulled me in. My heart slammed. I scrambled backward, gripping the recorder, which buzzed and warped, replaying distorted fragments of everything I had captured. Glimpses of my friend vanished completely as the soil buckled and settled. The fissure began to shrink, closing like a lid. Silence returned, oppressive and total, leaving only the faint tremor of earth and the lingering sense of otherness. I was alone, yet every hair on my body told me the cabin was still alive, still aware. I escaped, partially, crawling to a ledge near the cabin's half-buried roof. My breath came in shallow gasps, sweat and dirt clinging to my skin. The camera I carried remained on the ledge, its lens catching the last fading light. I dared not move closer. The cabin beneath me shifted minutely, almost reverently, settling back into its concealed state. The final shot framed a slowly burying structure. Faint creaks and whispers tickled the edges of perception, then silence. I realized the forest itself protected the cabin, an ancient sentinel feeding on those drawn by curiosity. My friend, or whatever remained, was absorbed, a memory pressed into soil and shadow. I stepped back, heart hammering, leaving the camera recording. Its lens reflected my own gaze. Somewhere in the faint vibrations of the earth, I thought I saw a shadow, fleeting and intangible, echoing my form. The camera continued, capturing tremors beneath the soil. Ghostly impressions of what had once been the Rand, perhaps still lingered. The cabin was silent, yet it would not forget.